Welcome, everybody, to ELNET's Monday Zoom briefing. For those of you who are astute enough to notice that my background is different, and that I'm not as dressed up as I usually am, it's because it is freshman move-in at Tulane University. So I have the pleasure of tuning in from my daughter's dorm room right now. It's been a busy morning, but I can tell you it's pretty quiet around campus, and that's a good thing. So I'm hopeful that what I'm seeing on campus, Jewish students wearing their stars, non-Jewish students out there doing their thing, will have a very quiet and successful year, not only here, but around the country. We have an interesting conversation today. Certainly a lot is going on in Israel and around the world. I want to start by reminding everybody that ELNET works to broaden defense, diplomatic, and economic cooperation between European countries and Israel. And we do this through our 6 regional offices that work in nearly 40 countries, including the EU Parliament and NATO. We are seeing, as you are, tensions rising around the globe. Last week, Israel's cabinet approved plans to militarily occupy Gaza and to conquer Gaza City, which is the last stronghold of Hamas. And that has met with a lot of tension. Not only has the plan increased those tensions in Europe, but it's exacerbated tensions in Israel. There's reported conflict between Prime Minister Netanyahu and IDF Chief Zamir about whether or not this plan should take place, and if so, how it's going to be conducted, and what about the fate of the hostages. And when we discuss the fate of the hostages, the Hostage Family Forum has certainly raised concerns, fearing that entering Gaza City would likely mean the deaths of those hostages still alive. And of course, you have Smotrich right now and the religious Zionist party. They're threatening to topple the government because the plan doesn't go far enough. So if that's not enough to make your head spin, despite the tensions between Starmer and Netanyahu, or what we're seeing with Starmer's proposed recognition of a Palestinian state, the UK apparently has been outsourcing intelligence planes to the United States to gather intelligence over Gaza about potentially where those hostages are being held, and they're sharing that intelligence with Israel. And just after Egyptian President al-Sisi accused Israel of systemic genocide, Egypt signs a $35 billion, that's a billion, with Israel. I bring up all of these internal and external conflicts just to illustrate the very simple point that nothing is as simple as people want it to be. And I get it. We all want things to fit nicely in a box. And that probably explains why politicians, now recently Australia and potentially New Zealand, are claiming that they want to recognize a Palestinian state. It's easy to take that and stick it in a bucket and ignore all the attendant questions that both David and I laid out in our article in JNS. What are the borders of this Palestinian state? Who's governing the Palestinian state? What are the economics behind this Palestinian state? What's the educational system behind this Palestinian state? So it's easy to take the concept of a Palestinian state and recognize one without having any understanding of the complexities of how one functions properly. So our job, that is all of us in the pro-Israel political community in Europe, ELNET, it's our job when speaking with political leaders across Europe to help them make informed decisions that impact their relationships with Israel. And today's world, where facts and truth are subordinate to cliques and politics, we become a vital source of information to our political friends. And no one has made this case recently better than John Spencer in a Substack article. And I want to reference this before I introduce our speaker that is going to take us further into this discussion. In that article, in his Substack article, he said the following: no military is more publicly condemned today than the Israeli Defense Forces. Yet behind closed doors, few are more studied. Western generals and defense officials routinely seek Israeli briefings, request access to doctrine and tactics, and pursue cooperation on training and technology. These efforts continue even as their political counterparts issue statements of moral outrage and condemnation. The contradiction reflects more than a double standard. It reveals a deeper divide between political perception and military reality, between external messaging and internal understanding, between illusion and experience. In many capitals, political performance overrides professional understanding. It was a timely publication because we have our returning guest, Michael Pregent, to get into this with me. Mike is a senior Middle East analyst, a former adjunct professor, lecturer for the College of International Security Affairs, a former senior fellow at the Hudson Institute, and a visiting fellow at the Institute for National Strategic Studies at the National Defense University. He is also a former intelligence officer with over 28 years of experience working on security, terrorism, counterinsurgency, and policy issues in the Middle East, North Africa, and Southwest Asia. And Mike also joined an ELNET military delegation last September. So, Mike, it's good to see you again. Thanks for joining us and welcome back.
Well, thanks for having me. I appreciate the opportunity to talk about this.
Yeah, it's going to be an interesting conversation because I want to get your take in a different perspective than what we got from Jackie Alexander, who's the CEO of Honest Reporting a couple of weeks ago. And from her perspective, what we were talking about was the role that the media plays in the perpetuation of propaganda and how the media has changed over time, as I said earlier, for clicks rather than facts. I want to get your perspective on Israel's war of information. What I didn't mention is you also have a master's in strategic communication in addition to your intelligence and military background. So there must be 1,000 if-then statements that must be addressed in military planning. And these decision trees must be far more enormous today than they were 20 years ago, much less, 60 years ago. As you reflect, or as you look into how militaries need to plan, particularly Israel right now, how would you categorize these buckets of decision trees? For instance, there are political decisions that have to be made. There are operational decisions that have to be made. There are human rights decisions that have to be made and communication decisions. What are those buckets? And what do you think are probably the most critical that Israel must be thinking about right now?
Well, it's only democracies that worry about media coverage. It's only democracies that feel the pressure of a population that's easily fed misinformation through mainstream media. And it can be constraining. It can also lead to defeat. If you look at our experience in Iraq and Afghanistan, we were there for 20 years in each theater, but some could argue that we were there 20 times for 1 year at a time, because each year we changed strategy based on a media report, whether it be Abu Ghraib, whether it be hitting a mosque, or whether it be a soldier burning a Quran. And in each case, our partner on the ground said, deny it. Deny it. Even if you did it, deny it, because coming forth will not serve you well. If you say you did it and the soldier's going to be punished, the whole military, the whole U.S. military in Afghanistan will be a target of the Taliban, will be a target of Al-Qaeda, will be a target of the Haqqani network. So that's the U.S., and we've been able to survive that. And the reason I bring up the U.S. and what we've had to deal with, our combatant to civilian ratio in Afghanistan and Iraq is 1 to 10, 1 to 20. In some cases, when we basically provided the Air Force for Iran's militias on the ground in Iraq during the ISIS campaign, it was 1 to 30, 1 to 60, meaning one bad guy, one ISIS fighter to 60 civilians. And we never faced that scrutiny in the press. We never faced that condemnation by basically every country that's opposed to Israel. Even the ones that are allies always have to couch their responses and still criticize Israel, find a way to do it. But if you look at what Israel's doing, I was like you said, I was in Gaza before the ELNET trip, also with another group, and I saw a demolition of a building. I saw a building explode, and I was talking to the Israeli soldier who was briefing us on this operation, and I said, "Was that a JDAM? Was that a bomb dropped from an aircraft on a building to destroy it?" He said, "No, that was a designed demolition, a controlled demolition of that building." And I said, "Well, if Christiana Amanpour sees that, she's going to say, look, the IDF just dropped a bomb on this building and killed a bunch of civilians." And he said something to me that I never heard a U.S. officer say. He said, we cannot control what the media thinks. We don't care what they think. If we let them constrain us, we won't be able to do our operation. We could have the media there, and they'll still say that we targeted civilians. So that's the difference here. And when we look at the reporting in the New York Times about famine and showing pictures that aren't accurate, it's too late, because when we're attacking that target audience, you mentioned my master's degree. One of the biggest problems we have is we have a target audience, and then we have an unintended target audience that receives information. And when we put out something that says, well, that's not true, it's too late, because the people's minds that we're trying to change, in order to believe what we're saying, would have to admit that they bought the lie, would have to admit that they actually were a useful idiot to misinformation in media narratives designed to discredit Israel. Israel is the gold standard when it comes to conducting combat operations. Everything we've learned to deal with terrorist organizations and how to combat them, we've learned from Israel. Everything that terrorist groups have learned to fight us, they've learned from Lebanese Hezbollah fighting Israel, or Palestinian Islamic Jihad, or the Sword of Islam, or all these other groups that have fought Israel. Israel is at the core of everything we learn as a counterterrorism force, and everything terrorist groups learn on how to deal with Israel. So it's more important than ever to support Israel as they're fighting this. But again, the argument is it cannot be won, because the audience, the target audience, or the group that we're trying to get to change their minds, would have to admit that they were lied to and they bought the lie, and they won't come to terms with that.
You know, it's interesting. I saw, as I'm sure you might have, and many of those on this briefing probably saw Netanyahu's interview last week with Bill Hemmer, which was an interesting interview, in part because he addressed the destruction that you just talked about as being designed demolition. And I think it raises the conundrum that you also just expressed. Many of these buildings that are completely collapsed were completely rigged by Hamas. And so they had to be set off by Israel to kind of clear the path for Israel to maneuver safely, and by extension for Palestinians, I assume, to maneuver more safely through these buildings. Is that I understand that correctly? That's what happens. And the images that we're seeing, and you see it on X, Israel destroyed all of Gaza. It's completely flattened now, but it's because Hamas had laden those buildings with explosives.
In a military operation, the cordon and search, right? You seal off an area and then you go and search door to door. If Israel only wanted to kill civilians, why would they put their soldiers at risk to go in and clear rooms, to go after Hamas leaders? But the reason these buildings have to be taken down also is that once they're cleared, Hamas comes back up through the tunnel network, and then will conduct operations from those buildings. So once the IDF has moved past that cleared neighborhood, that neighborhood is now being used to conduct ambushes. And one of the worst things that I heard from a Navy SEAL or an Israeli Navy SEAL sniper was, they played audio tapes of hostages crying for help from these buildings. And the IDF troops are hearing voices thinking they're going to go in there and save somebody, and it's a booby trap. It's an ambush. And that's why you need these controlled demolitions of these buildings as well. But when I went to the Philadelphia corridor and went to the Swedish city, we saw that every other building was wired for demolition by Hamas. Huge IEDs, huge barrel IEDs inside of these buildings. And if that building wasn't wired to explode, the other building had 2 tunnel networks or 2 hatches in it, where Hamas could conduct sniper operations or ambush operations. So the Israeli soldier is being asked not to kill civilians while Hamas hides behind civilians, not to destroy buildings while Hamas uses those buildings to conduct attacks and also detonates those buildings and say the Israelis do it. One of the biggest problems we have right now, and I know we're going to get to this topic, is any attempt to recognize a Palestinian state actually gives Hamas a victory. And that's one of the biggest problems right now. And that's why it's important for Netanyahu to go in and to clear Gaza City and to destroy that infrastructure that's there to preserve Hamas leadership and capabilities. And everyone that's pushing back against Netanyahu that he shouldn't do that, I'm not talking about people inside of Israel. I get that. It's a democracy. They can do that. But other countries that are saying don't do that. When Netanyahu and the IDF were successful in the Philadelphia corridor, were successful in Rafah. So anyway, there's a lot there, but Israel is the gold standard. They're doing everything right, and they're being criticized for doing everything imperfectly.
I'm going to get to the Gaza operation in just a moment, but I want to revisit something because I think it's interesting. I guess the closest example to Gaza may be, the early areas of Iraq that we went into. Mosul may be kind of a similar, I guess. I'm not an expert on military history, but I imagine the Iraq War presented similar, but not even close circumstances. Maybe Vietnam, even much farther back when you're dealing with an enemy that looks like the people, acts like the people, is infiltrated with the people, and has tunnels. What is really unique? What do you see in this war right now that you didn't see in Iraq and that we didn't see in Vietnam?
Okay, several things. So I wouldn't compare any of those places to Gaza because of that tunnel network, that underground tunnel network. We never dealt with that. Maybe in Vietnam, but it was never at this scale.
Hmm.
So you have a 2 million population above ground, and you have a terrorist organization below ground that can move into any humanitarian area and conduct attacks with the hopes that Israel will respond and kill civilians. That's the goal. Uh, so in that case, I mean, in that scenario, when you contrast it, uh, we didn't face Al Qaeda in Mosul and have protests in the U.S. supporting Al Qaeda, calling for us to stop operations against Al Qaeda. You have that with Hamas, these pro-Hamas protest movements. And then the Americans, and you saw a lot of our youth across Europe and the US read Osama bin Laden's letter and say, you know what, he had some good points. And what that sends to a terrorist leader is that, I could almost conduct an attack in the US and say it was because of their support for Israel. And I would probably have half of the American youth behind me, supporting this movement. So we never faced that in Iraq or Afghanistan. Vietnam was a very unpopular war, but it was a dedicated uniformed military and a dedicated uniformed guerrilla force, and it wasn't necessarily what we're dealing with now, where there was almost pride in our adversaries in Iraq and Afghanistan not to hide behind civilians, and you're not seeing that in Gaza. You're seeing it's intentional. Civilians being told to stay in place so that they can become martyrs. And to your point, what does Gaza look like afterwards? This education system where you're teaching kids that the goal is to become a shaheed, become a martyr, to kill Israelis. These are little kids. So in the argument of civilian deaths, how many future Hamas soldiers, how many future Hamas leaders are being cultivated in this education system that will bring about more hostages, more hostage families 10 years from now, more invasions in Israel. And that's one of the biggest problems is Netanyahu saw this when he released Yahya Sinwar back in the
Yeah.
day. Look who he became. Look what happened. The biggest contrast is Hamas knew they were going to have international support the day after October 7th. And no terrorist group has ever had that kind of ability to mobilize a pro-Hamas protest across Europe, across the US. And you have to look at Iran, you have to look at Turkey, you have to look at Qatar for sponsoring these types of things. So Israel is fighting US enemies, is fighting designated European terrorist groups and being condemned for it. And that's the biggest problem for an American to face, but for the IDF, for the Israelis, they're like, well, we can't win the public opinion battle, so we're just going to win the war.
Look, I get the argument that we can't win the public opinion, but communication, as you know, is vital, particularly with your strategic allies. And there is an element where proper communication, diplomacy is critical. You need your friends to understand clearly what you're doing. So there's an element of strategic communication, I think, also that's missing here. For any number of reasons, important facts and information are not making it to the important decision makers that it needs to get to. So let's turn to Gaza. Let's put the cap on you. You're Zamir, or you'll be IDF chair Pregent. How do you want to go in? What's most critical for you, given again the panoply of decisions that you've got to make? What are the 3 or 4 most critical for you if you're going to run this operation?
Well, one of the things that the IDF have going for it is that the Palestinian people know that the IDF is going to come into that area. So they know that they need to move out. It's always Hamas that tries to keep them there. The people want to leave. It's Hamas that keeps them there. So I would say, listen, we have that on our side. If we tell the Palestinian people we're coming, they're going to move. We set up these humanitarian areas where they can go in. We make sure that they get food, they get supplies. When it comes to embedding media, we just haven't had a lot of luck with that. When I was in Iraq, anytime we saw an Al Jazeera reporter or a cameraman over a bridge, we were allowed to fire a warning shot because we knew that Al Jazeera cameraman was embedded with Al Qaeda or was embedded with the Sunni insurgency. So embedding media to cover these actions, to send that message, I think would be important, but it also needs to be the right media. And then the other side will simply say they're just cheerleading the IDF offensive. They're saying exactly what the IDF wants them to say. It's hard to have objective media in these cases because, you know, the baseline for somebody who thinks Israel is killing children, it's a pretty serious baseline. It's almost sincere that they see it and they believe it. But then when you point out that this is why it happened and this is the ratio, they still can't come to terms with those, you know, the reality of war.
Mm-hmm.
So when it comes to, let's just go military hat. We have a humanitarian sector. We have credibility with the Palestinian people. They know that we're going to come in. We're going to, you know, roof knock. We're going to put out pamphlets and we're going to dismantle the command and control structure of Hamas. We're going to go into the mosques. We're not going to blow up the mosques. We're going to go into the mosques and we're going to show proof that they're using it as a command and control center. We're going to go into the hospitals. We're going to show proof. We're going to give it to these objective journalists, and then we're going to call them out when they don't highlight it as part of a strategic communications platform. That would be something in our military that the J5 would do. J5 being communications with the outside public relations. The operational aspect, the tunnel network, going underneath the tunnels, seeing where those tunnels are, highlighting every tunnel that falls underneath a UN tent or every tunnel that comes out in a hospital or a mosque or a school, and just go in and dismantle. Now, Hamas has been able to replenish. This is what I would tell you know, as an intel guy. Hamas has been able to replenish the ranks, but the ranks aren't experienced. The ranks are new conscripts. The ranks aren't the same level of leadership that were killed during the last 2 years. So you have a degradation in capability of Hamas, but you also might have a more randomized response when we conduct operations. But it's you know, September's the deadline, right? That's what we're talking about. Everybody's saying, you know, recognize Palestine. If there's not a ceasefire in place by September, we're going to do this. So that means the operation needs to be quick, fast, and it can't be a ruse. It can't be a feign to get more support. Or, you know, it has to go in, be effective, hold territory, clear it. And, you know, maybe there is some truth to some of these Palestinian military-age males being tired of Hamas and wanting to replace Hamas. And in that case, it's always a tough thing to find out who's irreconcilable and who's an irreconcilable. And that was kind of our experience in Iraq, being able to, you know, to decide who inside of an insurgency is tired of dealing with a terrorist group and wants to turn against it. And that's something we'll talk about when we get to Syria, of course, with Jelani.
Mm-hmm.
But
And where do the hostages right now fall in this calculus? It's a very difficult.
You have to have an honest conversation about the hostages. For every high value target, for every key leader in Hamas, they're going to have 4 or 5 hostages with them. We saw that when Yahya Sinwar we were getting close, you know, killed 5 hostages, right? Or 4 hostages.
Yeah.
So that's the reality. And another reality is if you do everything you can to appease Hamas to get dead bodies released and live bodies released, you're simply ensuring that future Israeli families will become hostage families because you're incentivizing this action. And if the European countries decide to recognize a Palestinian state, Hamas will say they won. And they'll say, well,
They already are.
The state needs to be bigger than this. Well, how about this part of the state? How about all of Israel? Because we are rewarding a terrorist group. It's becoming the model for jihadist leaders. Put on a suit, talk to a Westerner, convince them that you moderated, convince them that you're different. It's the Hamas model. You'll get a state sponsor in Qatar, you'll get a state sponsor in Turkey, and you'll get acquiescent, nuanced, European and American leaders that will say, well, let's see if this is real. Let's give them a chance. Anytime you give a terrorist group a chance, you give the terrorist group an advantage.
Yeah, Hamas is already taking credit for this. I don't remember which Hamas leader just said it, but he said this is the fruit of October 7th.
Right.
Their negotiating positions hardened as soon as Starmer, Macron, and Carney announced
Right.
Palestinian recognition. So, look, I think we can all understand the emotions around these visceral images that are spreading around the internet. Many are fake. Many are staged. Some are real. They are emotional. So I understand why there's public sentiment kind of brewing against Israel without the larger understanding of what is actually taking place. But Starmer, Macron, Mertz, Maloney, every other leader has an intelligence agency. They have a Department of Defense. They have military experts that understand what is taking place. They should be able to differentiate between fact and fiction. Just as John Spencer wrote in what I read earlier, there is this dissonance between the political echelons and the intelligence echelons. What does it look like behind the scenes here? Is it that these political leaders don't care? Is it that and are the intelligence agencies pressing their political leaders on this? And if they are, how is this sausage being made?
Well, I think what's changed for me, looking at the American intelligence community, and what's changed in the last, since the Syria crisis, with all the refugees going into Europe and what's happened in the United States, our intelligence agencies no longer have the luxury of looking at threats abroad from the comfort of their country, from the comfort of being inside their borders. The threat is there now. So inside the intelligence community, an honest conversation is taking place. If we make, not in the U.S. necessarily, not yet, but I think inside of Macron's government, if we take a pro-Israel position and demand these things, what are we facing inside of our own country with what we've allowed to fester, with where we can't control areas? So there is again, you have to remember, a successful terrorist attack in Europe is somebody with an AK-47 that's able to kill 5 to 10 civilians and say it's in the name of something. It doesn't have to be a sophisticated attack. It just has to be a successful one. And we've elevated what a successful attack is in Western media as any attack where somebody says it's in the name of this or the name of that. ISIS built that brand. ISIS developed the lone wolf terrorists, where anybody could do something and say it's in the name of ISIS. So it's easy to do that. So our intelligence communities are now looking at, okay, who are the charismatic jihadists that are in our country, trying to look at the talent inside of these protests, these pro-Hamas protests, these anti-Israel protests, looking for those military-age males that are 1 degree away from violence. And what can we do about it? And the terrible answer here is we don't have the ability to see that here. We don't have we're not having the honest conversation of there is a threat here and it's here and it's now. And because it's political, right? Because anytime you profile, we always have the charges of you're being xenophobic, you're targeting Muslims, and it's constraining. And the media gets a hold of that, and the media said Trump is targeting Middle Eastern men. It's that serious. Now Trump can stomach that, but a lot of European leaders can't do that. There are areas in Paris that the police can't go in. After the Stade de France bombing, those ISIS guys, they ran to one of these neighborhoods and they had shelter, and those people protected them. So the intelligence communities no longer have the luxury of looking at threats abroad when the threats are here. And now the decision to do something is tied to a political event inside of the country based on what you can't control. And it's these little centers of military-age males that they're not pro-Palestine. They're not. I've been in the Middle East a long time. I know that most countries want a Palestinian state so the Palestinians in their countries can go there. And that's the brutal, honest truth, speaking to intelligence people directors, Iraqis in Baghdad and their intelligence ministries, working with 4 Kuwaitis that were Shia Palestinians during the Gulf War, and how they were treated by the Kuwaitis that were Sunni, just based on those little differences. And it is a tough mission. Foreign intelligence is easy. So these European intelligence agencies have a picture of what's going on, but there's no one that has a better human intelligence network than the Israelis. We may have technical advantages when it comes to imagery or, what we can listen to, what we can track, but the Israelis are right there with that capability as well. But their human intelligence network is better than anybody's. And I wouldn't say that Europe would know better than Israel where these hostages were, unless this is a big this is a big intelligence operation to get Hamas to trust you so that you can find out where they are, which would be great. But I just don't have that faith in people doing that, unfortunately.
Well, look, we're harping really on European leaders. Some have illustrated the leadership to stand up and stick with Israel despite a lot of pressure. Others have capitulated. But the reality is that, as you just mentioned, Arab and Muslim countries have their own politics as well. They have their streets that they have to play to. That explains why al-Sisi accused Israel of systemic genocide while signing also a $35 billion gas deal. That's been the game for the last 50 years, kind of placate the street, keep it G to G relationships as warm as possible. But it is incredibly frustrating to see Western leaders capitulating the way they are on some of these issues. So I want to get back to the decision to go into Gaza. We touched on it a little bit, but I often warn people of outcome bias. That is, looking at a particular outcome, disregarding the entire decision process that led to it, and judging the decision based on how it turned out. If it turned out well, you could have had a terrible process, but you're given, all the glory. If it turned out bad, but you had a great decision process, you're a loser. Walk us through kind of the decision tree, because many on this call are going to want to make a case for going in or not going in, or may not, or want to understand the argument for going in or not for going in. And then obviously they're going in. So we have to understand the various junctions where if this happens, then this is the decision. Why is Netanyahu choosing to go in? What is his decision tree? And then what are those that are saying don't go in? What are their arguments? And how do you, well, it obviously is playing out with them going in. Make the case one way or the other if you could. I think I know where you're going, but it would be helpful to hear how you work through this.
Well, this is the reality of this is Netanyahu is being told by European leaders, that we're going to recognize a Palestinian state if there's no ceasefire in place in September. Well, the way to force Hamas's hand is to go in now. To go in and conduct effective, successful military operations. And one of the maddening parts of this is Europe isn't putting any preconditions for Hamas in these talks. They're not saying that Hamas needs to release all hostages by September, that Hamas needs to lay down its arms by September. They're basically saying we're going to recognize a Palestinian state. So you basically forced Israel into a timeline where it has to do something. And what do you want to do to protect Israeli civilians? You want to eradicate the threat. Will you kill everyone? No, you will not. You will not kill every Hamas leader. You will not kill the ideology, but you have to degrade the military capability. You have to degrade the planning capability. You have to degrade, target, kill, capture the charismatic leaders that can put plans into place. They can do these things. So this timeline was kind of forced on Netanyahu, in my opinion, just looking at this, that you have to do something now. It's like when Trump gave Putin 50 days. I argued, why would you give Putin 50 days? He's going to take those 50 days to do as much damage as he can inside of Ukraine. Then you change it down to 10 days. So you can't give an enemy a deadline and expect them not to take advantage of that. In this case, you're giving an ally a deadline and you're criticizing them taking advantage of what you just put in place. They have to go in, they have to do this. Again, degrade capability to protect civilians. You have to degrade Hamas to the point where it'll take months, it'll take years for them to get back to where they can conduct these types of attacks. Look what happened to Hezbollah. That was huge. What happened in Iran? What's happened with the Houthis? All of Hamas's backers have been degraded to a point where they cannot help Hamas at this point. So it's time to go in and do this. And you also have to take in the political capital of a U.S. president. Trump's got about another year of good political capital before he doesn't. So you have to do all this stuff now to, like I said, degrade the capability to plan operations, to mobilize, to train, to do all these things. And that's why I believe the decision tree is to go in now to do these things. And people say, what about the day after? And what I say is the day after is a nice place to be. Okay, the day after is a luxury. We don't know what the day after is because that would mean Hamas is gone or Hamas is degraded, where Israel can go in. And the day after is a nice place to be. And that's where the international community can help. I have some suggestions. No country that supports the Muslim Brotherhood should be part of any Arab force inside of Gaza. And the Palestinian Authority shouldn't be there either. But it's a nice place to be. We just got to get there yet. And I used this argument before in Afghanistan where we had some State Department people saying, well, we have to think about empowering women and putting them in parliament and getting them in these positions. And I'm like, well, didn't we take on the Taliban first and defeat them first and all these other groups? Because until you defeat that oppressive terrorist regime, none of those things are going to happen. They're nice to haves. The day after problems are always nice to have ones.
Yeah, it's letting the perfect stand in the way of the good,
Right.
and it just causes everybody to delay. And so, since you went there, I'm going to ask John Marish's question. Let's talk about Qatar for a second. You know, you are no fan of Qatar. I can't say many of us here are fans of Qatar. What is your recommendation for ensuring they stay out? Though it seems unlikely that they're out, but what are your thoughts going forward?
Well, you know what? After we bombed, Natanz and Fordo, I put out a tweet. Again, controversial dinner guest. I put it out there. I said, it's basically Qatar. And said, didn't we pay the Trump administration not to do this? Based on all the money that's going inside the Trump administration when it comes to Witkoff and when it comes to Kushner and others. So, so let's be factual about Qatar. When I was in Afghanistan, they funded the Taliban. When I was in Iraq, they funded Al Qaeda. When I worked the ISIS campaign, they used, ISIS was able to use Al Jazeera as a propaganda platform. In Afghanistan, the Taliban was able to do it. Al Qaeda was able to do it. And in Iraq. Qatar is a country that is punching above its weight. It's like a cheating spouse that makes a great meal and wants to stay with you no matter what. You make excuses. They host a base, so then they can host Hamas. They can host the Taliban. And when we ask them, it makes sense. Let's ask a country in the Middle East that has the ability to incentivize an outcome to open back channels with a terrorist organization. I mean, that's what was done with Qatar when it comes to Hamas.
Mhm.
It didn't mean fund them. It didn't mean find a way to get more money to them. It didn't mean to push contracting companies tied to Hamas to build projects in Turkey and other places. It didn't mean to host a leadership to celebrate October 7th on October 8th on your platforms. Qatar has been part of this the whole time. When we used Qatar to get Bo Bergdahl out of Taliban custody, we ended up giving back, this was a Qatari negotiated outcome. We gave the Taliban back 5 key leaders that were back in Afghanistan within a year after Qatar promised they would be in Qatar for 5 years. When it comes to the $10 billion that we put in a Qatari bank for Iran to be able to use that for humanitarian assistance, we know money is fungible. That was a Qatari negotiated outcome where we
So, what do
were.
we do about it?
I think it's as simple as telling Qatar, stop, or we're going to sanction your sovereign fund. We're going to sanction key individuals inside of your government. I think the mere threat of sanctions would get this little country to stop. I think the mere threat of moving the base to Bahrain would get this country to stop. This is not a country with leverage. This is a country where we continue to cede our leverage and allow it to do whatever the hell it
Mhm.
wants to. Hosting a U.S. base should give the United States leverage. It shouldn't give Qatar leverage. It shouldn't give Turkey leverage. It shouldn't give Iraq leverage. And I mentioned those three countries because we were not able to conduct attacks to defend Israel against Iran's missiles from those three bases. We have U.S. bases in Qatar, Iraq, and Turkey. We were not able to use those bases to go after Shia militias targeting American forces inside of Iraq and Syria. We were not able to use those bases to defend Israel. We had to go, we had to use our carrier group. We had to use other allies. And so that should be the consequence of not being able to use a U.S. base inside of one of these countries should be that you lose that U.S. base. The mere threat of sanctions against Qatar would stop a lot of this. What would I do?
So here's
Yeah, I would.
so if I could just pause you there, here's the
Sure.
$1 million question. Not one administration over, oh geez, I don't know how long, certainly not in recent memory, has taken one step to push Qatar aside, to threaten Qatar, to change its actions. They've all known for decades what Qatar has been doing inside this country. Let's just talk about this country. What will it take, at least in the United States and across Europe? Because again, we discussed it a few months ago, French intelligence report showing the Muslim Brotherhood, funded by Qatar, deep ties throughout Europe. What will it take?
Well, you look at the U.S. Anytime I talk to somebody about taking Qatari money, they say, well, they're a non-NATO major U.S. ally. So you take that away from them. We can't use that anymore. You take that base away. It's a big problem. Qatar basically has a stake in three of the teams here in Washington, D.C., three of our professional teams. The best mall and restaurant district inside of Washington, D.C., downtown, is Qatar owned, Qatar funded. It's not hard to pay off an academic in a think tank. It's $20K a month, $40K a month. It's easy. I asked a buddy of mine the other day, would you take Qatari money? He goes, absolutely. And it's that easy because they say we're a major or a non-NATO major U.S. ally. And it's a great argument because you can't argue against it. Yeah, they shouldn't be, but they are. Yeah. So take that away. I mean, they
I thought the game.
You can see
I'm sorry,
Trump's comments in 2018 were anti-Qatar during the blockade. Then Jared Kushner gets $1 billion from Qatar, and it changes. Not the timeline. I'm not doing cause and effect, but I'm saying that $1 billion went there, and now Jared Kushner is out of government. And one of the biggest things that I see is, okay, the Abraham Accords, right? Why isn't Qatar being asked to be one of the first countries to join this thing after the first four? Is Qatar more important than Saudi Arabia? Saudi Arabia is more important, but if Qatar did it, Qatar would fall apart. It would lose its ability to do anything because it would no longer be that terrorist bank. You couldn't do that anymore. Right. It would no longer be the front company for Iran's transactions. Qatar not being asked to be part of the Abraham Accords is very telling.
That's very interesting. Very, very interesting. I guess if you really wanted to call Qatar's bluff, you'd welcome them to the Abraham Accords.
They would say no.
Interesting.
You're
interesting.
Turkey as well.
Yeah.
They won't do it.
I thought the game was lost as soon as Bill Bennett, former Secretary of Education, said that he was going to take a job lobbying for Qatar.
Good money.
Yeah, it's good money. Endless money. I'm going to pause here for a moment, and then I'm going to ask you a question regarding Al-Shura, and then I'm going to open it up to questions from participants. We have a number of questions in the queue. If you have a question, feel free to submit it. I just want to offer a few words about ELNET for those of you who need to know a little bit more about our work. These are the types of conversations that our offices all across Europe are having with key political leaders, political influencers, and policy influencers, because these are the conversations that keep these relationships firm. It's challenging. It's not going to get that much easier in the next couple of months, but this is what we do. And this is why you invest in a pro-Israel organization that is working to cultivate these defense, diplomatic, and economic relationships all across Europe. We need to grow, and we need your help to do it. If you have not yet become a Diplomacy Club member of ELNET, please do so today. As I said just a couple of weeks ago, we're now in the second half of 2025. Many of you have determined that you have philanthropic dollars still available for investment. There is no better return on investment than ELNET at this stage of the game. The opportunities are tremendous. Italy just announced millions and millions of dollars worth of investments into Israel. Romania, $2.4 billion deal estimated to be with Israel. There are opportunities to be had to further align all of Europe with Israel, but it's going to take work from all of you and all of us for us to get there. So to make it easy, you can hold your camera up to this or screenshot it. This will take you to our contribution link on our website. Please invest in our work, invest in ELNET, and invest in the Europe-Israel relationship. So with that, again, thank you all for joining us today. Back to the questions. Mike, this is my last question for you because I still find al-Shara to be this, he's a, wish I could remember the phrase, but the conundrum wrapped in an enigma, wrapped in a riddle. If I said that correctly, you've spent time with the Peshmerga in Mosul. You speak Arabic. You can see what is being said or read what's being said behind the scenes. The way I sort of look at al-Shara, I see a couple of options here. One, he's reformed, but he still has to play the game because he's got people that are going to follow him that he needs to bring along. That's one option for giving him a little bit of latitude to perhaps explain some of the actions that have taken place under his watch. The other option is he simply remains a wolf in sheep's clothing. What's your assessment of the man?
Somebody has to be a skeptic, Mark. Somebody has to be a skeptic. And I found myself alone again, dealing with some of these issues. So in Baghdad, after my tour in Mosul, I went to Baghdad and I worked with the Force Strategic Engagement Cell. And it was an entity run under a British General Lamb, former SAS guy, and we were trying to find reconcilables and irreconcilables in the Al-Qaeda movement. And in that, we never came across a Jilani. We never came across anybody of that stature that was willing to change, do a 180 and go against jihadists. And we wouldn't believe them if they said they were going to. There was always a deliverable. And I've heard through back channels that, yes, Jilani has provided our agencies and other intel agencies with information that has helped us hit ISIS targets. Well, HTS and ISIS are rivals. So that makes sense anyway. When he was an Al-Qaeda leader, he divorced himself from ISIS or said that ISIS couldn't be part of this. So somebody has to be the skeptic. If Jilani was truly reformed, Jilani would be dead. You cannot have people like that around you that are jihadists, that are part of the HTS movement. Remember, HTS, he changed al-Nusra Front to HTS, Harir Tariq al-Sham, to avoid sanctions. The Nusra Front was designated by the U.S. Department of Justice as a terrorist organization. And what the Iranians learned is you just create a new militia that isn't designated, and you can conduct operations, and the U.S. won't do anything about it because they're not designated. So that tactic was used by Jilani when he changed the name. And we have to remember 4 months ago, Jilani was a terrorist. Jilani was an Al-Qaeda leader, and now he's reformed. It's the Hamas model. Somebody has to be a skeptic. And the one thing in the military that we use as a credo is hope is not a method. We don't hope that he's good. We don't hope that he's reformed. You see what's happening. And if you see what's happened with the Druze, you see what's happening inside of Syria. If he was reformed, he'd be dead. Because the people he has around him are all his guys. They're all jihadists, and they're being allowed to do things. So he can simply say, listen, I'm just trying to get us sanctions. Let's rebuild. We got 3 years under Trump. Trump's buying into this, that I'm reformed. He wants to lift sanctions on Syria. I know there's some obstacles there, which is great, by the way. But if you're Jilani, and I'm not going to call him by his other name, I'm going to call him Jilani. He is looking to get money, get weapons, train, and Jordan is so fragile right now. Jordan is probably the next target for what Syria wants to do, or what Jelani wants to do with his jihadist military. You have to be, for me, I'm a warnings, I'm a metrics and warnings guy. I'm a warnings and indicators guy. And I see a charismatic leader that's able to simply don a suit the day after he looked like a jihadist and win over European leaders. That is something that Erdogan kind of taught him, a do this kind of thing. We have to remember Erdogan's ties to Jelani, and also Qatar's funding all of this. Again, if Qatar's funding a leader and Erdogan supporting a leader, that in itself you can be skeptical about. But we also have to deal with the crowd that is pro Jelani. They're anti-Assad and they're anti-Iran, they're anti-Hezbollah. That doesn't mean you have to be pro-Al Qaeda. I'm anti-Al Qaeda, anti-ISIS, anti-Hezbollah, anti-Assad, every group that's going after Syrian nationalists that actually want to take their country back from jihadists, whether they be Shia ones or Sunni ones. But you have this split. There's my colleagues in DC are saying, Jelani's the guy. He's a reformist. But none of them have worn the uniform, or none of them have dealt with insurgencies in a way where you engage them to try to turn them, to bring them the other way. And I've seen, people that are former military that are now with certain think tanks that are saying things, but they're not. I don't believe it. Petraeus didn't believe these things when I worked for him. H.R. McMaster didn't believe any of these things when I worked for him, when we were dealing with the counterinsurgency during the awakening or during the surge in Iraq. We would never buy a Jelani unless he showed us something. And we wouldn't allow a group to go into Ceuta and kill a bunch of people and say that, oh, that's disconnected from Jelani, that's sanctioned by Jelani, that's approved by Jelani. None of those people have been arrested, put in jail, shown on the media, Syrian media, for the atrocities they committed. That tells you a lot.
I think we could go on and on there, but I want to turn it over to some questions because there's certainly a lot of follow-up questions we could ask about the willful disregard of the facts around Jelani. Why? But I'd like to turn it over to, let's ask Robert Spiegel the question. Robert Spiegel, I'm sorry. Why isn't there more explicit message that Hamas must surrender? We hear that Hamas can't be a part of a future government. But he's right. We haven't seen outright calls for Hamas to surrender, lay down its weapons, release the hostages, and surrender now. Why do you think that is? If there's any rational explanation for it.
Well, I think it's the realism that Hamas is so embedded in Gaza when it comes to, you have to remember who fills the ranks of Hamas. It's the Palestinian moms and dads, and it's a family-run organization. Almost every Palestinian family has a member that has at one point joined Hamas, Palestinian Islamic Jihad, or another group. So, Josh Rogan from the Washington Post said it out loud. He said, Hamas is entrenched. It's so entrenched in Palestinian culture and what's going on in Gaza that you can't eradicate it, because the question is there really a civilian casualty in this war? Of course, when it comes to children and everything. But if you look at the mentality, if you look at who was celebrating after October 7th, it's hard to distinguish between militants and the civilians. And you can almost argue that the Hamas militants were more disciplined than the civilians were when it came to atrocities inside of Israel, and also when Israelis were brought into Gaza. It's just weak-stomached leaders inside of Europe that won't make these demands. Saying that, yes, Hamas is a terrorist organization, and yes, they must release the hostages, but Israel should stop, and we're going to recognize a Palestinian state. You just basically negated your first part of your argument. Hamas is not going to release the hostages. Why would they? They don't have to now. They can get more for it. They have leverage. And I think that, again, going back to the military operations in Gaza, that's why they need to happen. Gaza City.
So I'm going to ask this last question, then I'll turn it over to ELNET Chair Tom Flesch for final words. But optimism and skepticism are generally opposites. So it's hard to ask you to be optimistic when your general inclination is to be a skeptic, but I'm going to do it. What are there things you're optimistic about? And if not yet optimistic, what do you want to see that will give you a sense of optimism going forward?
So what I love about the ELNET forum is I know you have people on the opposite side of what I'm saying as well. So that's why I can take this position knowing that there will be some balance at some point. So when you ask me to be optimistic about something, I don't know how I can be optimistic about it when Qatar's not being held to account, where Iran is coming back to the negotiating table, where Turkey has somehow managed to stay out of this, without any repercussions for what they are doing when it comes to supporting Hamas, when it comes to supporting Jelani. I am optimistic that if you upset the president or make him look bad, like Putin is doing with Ukraine, that he might change his calculation. He might change his position. I was surprised that we attacked Iran's nuclear sites. So I'm optimistic about being surprised by the actions of the US president. How about that?
Okay, it's kind of a backwards way of looking at optimism, but I guess we'll take it. If that's optimistic for you, we're happy to have it.
If we left it to the politicians, they'll use words like, well, this is complex, this is very complicated, this is more nuanced. And it's basically, those are keywords that we're not going to do anything about this. And a terrorist organization loves to hear that from a bureaucrat. And the good thing about a wild card like President Trump is you just don't know what he's going to do.
I'll be a little more optimistic in the Reagan sense. I'm going to start trusting some things, but I really expect to verify that they are what they appear to be. So I'll play that part of skeptic with you. So with that, one, I want to say thanks, Mike. It's great having you on. Love reading your posts wherever I see them. And I appreciate your skepticism because it's really very much needed in today. And you gave us a lot to talk about, a lot to think about, and hopefully a lot to take to politicians and policymakers around the world. Tom, the floor is yours.
Thank you very, very much. And Mike, once again, most informative. I always enjoy learning from you. You stimulate information and thought and create informed decisions, which I say leads to making ELNET relevant and making all our supporters very relevant. And if there is a position in your life that gives you great satisfaction of being part of something that is really relevant and making a difference, I submit to our audience that ELNET is that vehicle. And your participation and your belief in us, Mike, it just reinforces that thought. So I encourage all of our listeners to follow you. We hope you will be back again. You've been with us before, and it's very stimulating. We had great response, and I said to you earlier, one of the rewards for doing a job well done is asking you to do it again. And I hope that we will have the opportunity to do it again as well. But again, I'm saying to all of our listeners, join what ELNET is doing. ELNET is very relevant, the premier European support group for Israel, very relevant, and all of our supporters are very relevant as our team members. So as a personal note, I'm just really encouraging our supporters to really understand how relevant they are by being with us and supporting us. And I appreciate that. We are very, very happy that you're with us, and we look forward to having some success and more success into the future. Thank you.
Thanks again, everybody. Thanks, Mike. See you soon, everybody. Have a wonderful week.
Thank you so much.